March 2nd, 1945. Hill 362A, Iwo Jima. The enemy was supposed to be dead. He was not. The air, thick with cordite and the metallic tang of blood, carried the order. It was an unwritten order, a primal scream echoing across the black volcanic sand. Kill them all. No prisoners. They had not taken any of ours. We would not take any of theirs. The enemy was the mission. The enemy was the target. The enemy was not a patient, but someone forgot to tell the medics. The first report was dismissed as battlefield hallucination. A Marine, temporarily blinded by a mortar blast, swore he saw a Navy corpsman administering morphine to a Japanese machine gunner. The same gunner who had just scythed down 3 men from Easy Company. Impossible. A ghost story born from sulfur and shock. Then a second report surfaced, and a third. They all said the same thing. They all spoke of a madness, a mercy that had no place in the meat grinder. Pharmacist's mate. Second-class David Rowe, 20 years old, from a town in Ohio no one had ever heard of. He was one of them. A witness described Rowe crawling on his belly through sniper fire, not toward a wounded Marine, but toward the jagged lip of a pillbox. Inside, a Japanese lieutenant, his leg mangled by a grenade, was trying to reload his pistol. Rowe reached him. He did not disarm him. He dressed his wound. Why? No one knew. But rumors existed. Rumors always existed. Someone whispered it was a new kind of psychological warfare, a demonstration of power so absolute it could afford to be merciful. Others claimed it was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let the island's butchery claim their souls. A sergeant from the 5th Division said he heard it was an experiment, a sick experiment from some rear echelon command trying to measure the breaking point of the human spirit. They called it Operation Nightingale. The name was never spoken above a whisper. The official battle records are silent on the matter. The unit histories mention only valor against the enemy, not compassion for him. The sanitized reports forwarded to Fleet Command speak of casualties, ammunition expenditures, and ground gained. Inches of hell paid for in blood. But in the declassified archives of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, a thin manila folder remains. It was designated File 73 Delta. The title, typed on a faded label, reads, Anomalous Medical Conduct, Iwo Jima. The file contains a handful of interviews, censored and cryptic. One testimony from a Corporal Miller states, he was a medic, just a medic. He said his job was to fix people. He never said which people. This is not the story of a battle. This is the story of the paradox that bled through its cracks. It is the story pieced together from forbidden whispers, redacted reports, and the haunted memories of men who witnessed an act they could not comprehend. American medics risking their lives to save the Japanese soldiers who had tried to kill them only hours before. An act of treason. Or an act of grace. October 7th, 1944. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was a worthless island, a pork-chop-shaped smear of volcanic ash in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. 8 square miles of rock and black sand stinking of sulfur. No fresh water, no strategic resources, nothing. It was a place God had forgotten to finish. It was the most important worthless island in the world. The folder was called Operation Detachment. The target was Chichijima, they thought. Maybe Haha-jima. But the reconnaissance photos kept coming back to the ugly one. The one the Japanese called Iwo Jima. Sulphur Island. The B-29s were falling out of the sky. The super fortresses. The pride of the Army Air Forces, crippled on their long 16-hour flights from the Marianas to Tokyo. They needed a midway point, a haven, an unsinkable aircraft carrier sitting 750 miles from the Japanese mainland. They needed Iwo Jima. The decision was made. Simple arithmetic. But someone else was doing arithmetic on that island. A general. His name was Tadamichi Kuribayashi. He was not like the others. They said he had attended Harvard. They whispered he had been a military attaché in Washington, that he knew the American mind, knew its industrial might, knew its impatience. He knew he could not win. He never intended to win. He intended to make the cost of victory so high, so horrifyingly high, that America would lose its will to fight. So he changed the rules. No more suicidal bonsai charges on the beaches. That was wasteful. That was the old way. The new doctrine, his doctrine, was written in a captured document found months later. It was simple. It was brutal. Every man would fight from a prepared defensive position. Every man would remain in that position until death. Every man would kill 10 Americans before he died. 10 Americans. He was not building a fortress. He was digging a mass grave. A grave for them and for the Americans who would have to crawl inside to join them. For 10 months, Kuribayashi's 22,000 men turned Iwo Jima into a nightmare made of rock and concrete. An anthill of death. They built over 1,500 pillboxes, blockhouses, and hidden gun positions, all connected. Connected by a web of tunnels, 11 miles of tunnels. On an island only 4.5 miles long, 11 miles, they dug them with hand tools through volcanic rock in blistering heat. Some tunnels were 30 feet deep with multiple levels, barracks, hospitals, and command centers. They were ventilated by a complex system of shafts, invisible from the air, invisible from the sea. The plans for this network existed in only one place. Kuribayashi's mind. 22,000 men, not soldiers waiting on a beach, 22,000 ghosts already living underground. February 19th, 1945. D-Day. The bombardment began at dawn. The largest fleet ever assembled for a Pacific operation pounded the island for 3 days straight. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers. They fired thousands upon thousands of shells. The Navy planners said nothing could survive. Nothing. The Marines of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Divisions, waiting in their landing craft, believed them. They had to. The first wave hit the beach at 0902. The sand was soft, black, like coffee grounds. The Higgins boats and amphibian tractors bogged down, easy targets. The shelling stopped. And then, nothing. For an hour, an eerie silence fell over the black beaches. The Marines pushed inland, struggling through the volcanic ash that swallowed their boots up to their shins. They thought it was over. They thought the Navy had done its job. Then Kuribayashi gave the order. From his command post deep inside Mount Suribachi, he unleashed hell. It came from everywhere, and from nowhere. Mortars from hidden pits, machine gun fire from camouflaged concrete pillboxes no one had seen. Artillery from reverse slopes the naval guns couldn't touch. Men fell. They just fell. One moment they were running, cursing the black sand. The next they were a heap on the ground. The beach became a junkyard of burning vehicles and broken bodies. It was not a battle, it was a slaughterhouse. The fighting was not linear, it was vertical. The enemy was not in front of them, he was below them. He was inside the island. Marines would capture a pillbox, only to be shot in the back by Japanese soldiers emerging from a hidden tunnel entrance 20 feet away. They threw grenades into caves, waited for the explosion, and then more Japanese would pour out of another opening. They fought with rifles, bayonets, knives, sharpened bamboo spears, and bare hands. They fought for inches, not yards, inches. A sketch from a combat artist's notebook shows it all. It is chaos drawn in charcoal and fear. A Marine, face blackened with grime, aims a flamethrower into a dark hole in a rock face. The fire illuminates the contorted face of a Japanese soldier inside. Another Marine lies nearby, his helmet askew, his hand still gripping his M1 Garand. The ground is a pockmarked hellscape of craters, wires, and rock. The sketch is labeled simply, Hill 382, the meat grinder. The battle was supposed to last 5 days. It lasted 36. 36 days of unbelievable savagery. Mount Suribachi fell on February 23rd, the famous flag raising. But that was just the beginning. The main battle moved north into a labyrinth of ridges, gorges, and fortified caves the Marines called the Meat Grinder, the Amphitheater, Turkey Knob, and Bloody Gorge. Names given by 19-year-old boys, names that would haunt them forever. The casualty rate was almost 100% for the frontline infantry units. 26,000 American casualties. More than 6,800 dead. A man a minute during the first days. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded, more than for any other single battle in American history. 27, March 26, 1945. The island was declared secure. Organized resistance had ended, the report said. Kuribayashi was dead, believed to have led a final desperate charge from his last command post. Of his 22,000 defenders, over 21,000 were killed. Only 216 were taken prisoner. Most of them were captured unconscious or wounded. The rest chose death. But the fighting did not stop. Not really. For weeks, for months after the island was secure, the ghosts of Iwo Jima fought on. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of Japanese soldiers remained hidden deep within the tunnels. They emerged at night. They hunted for food, for water, for another American to kill. They were the fulfillment of Kuribayashi's promise. The reports kept coming in. Sporadic, strange. A patrol ambushed in April, a supply clerk found with his throat cut in May. A lone sniper picked off by a Marine sentry in June. They sealed the caves with explosives. They bulldozed the entrances shut. They tried to entomb the dead. The enemy was supposed to be gone. He was not. One report, dated July 2, 1945, spoke of 2 Seabees clearing rubble near Kitano Point. They heard something. A sound from deep within the earth, from a cave they thought was sealed. A noise. It was metal on rock. Digging. They were still digging. May 5, 1945. The Maida Escarpment, Okinawa. They were supposed to be gods. That's what the grunts said, the men who could walk through fire and bring you back from the dead. They wore the uniform of the United States Navy, a deep blue for a deep ocean, but their boots were caked in the mud and blood of the United States Marine Corps. They were not sailors, not really. They were not soldiers, not by definition. They were something else. Something in between. The official designation was hospital corpsmen. The men on the line, the men with the rifles and the fear, just called them Doc. And when they screamed that name, it was a prayer. A desperate, final prayer. The casualty rate was a secret. A tightly held secret, buried in after-action reports stamped with red ink. Top secret. The numbers were obscene. On Iwo Jima, the corpsmen assigned to the 28th Marines suffered casualties of 81%. 81. That meant for every 5 docs who landed on that black sand, only 1 walked off. The Japanese knew. Oh, they knew. Their training manuals, translated after the war, were explicit. Shoot the man with the radio first, then shoot the man with the medic bag. The man with the red cross on his helmet was not a non-combatant. He was the prime target. He was the glue holding the enemy line together. Kill the doc, and you kill the platoon's will to fight. It was simple math, cruel math. They were a strange breed, these men. They ran toward the sound of the guns, armed with nothing more than morphine syrettes, battle dressings, sulfa powder, and a K-bar knife for emergencies. They learned to be invisible, to crawl on their bellies like snakes dragging their canvas bags filled with life. They learned the sound of incoming mail, the whistle of a mortar round that had your name on it. They learned the geography of a man's body in the dark, finding a femoral artery by feel alone, their fingers slick with a stranger's blood. They learned to ignore the screams, their own and others. They had a job to do. One job. Keep them alive. And then there was Doss. Private First Class Desmond T. Doss. An anomaly in a war built on conformity. A file in a cabinet full of files, but his was thicker. It had letters from congressmen, from generals, from chaplains. Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist from Lynchburg, Virginia. He would not kill. He would not even touch a rifle. The army tried to get rid of him. They put him on latrine duty, they hazed him, they called him a coward, a yellow belly, a disgrace to the uniform. His commanding officer, Captain Jack Glover, tried to have him transferred. The papers were almost signed. A Section 8 psychiatric discharge for refusing to carry a weapon. But Doss stayed. He insisted. He had to be a medic. He had to save them. That's how he found himself on Okinawa, on top of that godforsaken cliff. The 77th Infantry Division called it Hacksaw Ridge, a sheer 400-foot escarpment bristling with Japanese machine gun nests, caves, and pillboxes. The Americans took the top. Then they were thrown off. They took it again, and were cut to pieces. On May 5th, the Japanese counterattack was overwhelming, a storm of steel and fire. The order came down the line, ragged and broken. Retreat, fall back, every man for himself. And they did. The able-bodied scrambled back down the cargo nets they had used to ascend, leaving the wounded behind, leaving them for the Japanese. It was a death sentence. Everyone retreated. Everyone but Doss. He stood there alone on the fire-swept plateau, a skinny, awkward man in a world of killers. He looked out over the field of bodies, the dead, the dying, the screaming. He could hear the Japanese soldiers moving closer, finishing off the wounded with bayonets and pistol shots. He prayed. Just a simple prayer. Lord, please help me get one more. He found a man, his leg nearly torn off. He dragged him to the edge of the cliff. He tied a rope around his chest using a special knot he had invented, one that would not slip. And he lowered him down into the arms of the men below. One man, then he went back. Lord, help me get one more. He went back again, and again, and again, for hours. He moved through the smoke and the chaos, a ghost in a landscape of hell. He treated men from Alabama, from Michigan, from Texas, from Oregon. Men he knew, men he didn't. He never stopped. The Japanese were all around him. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortars exploded so close they showered him with dirt and rock. But he was never hit. It was a miracle. That's what the men said later, a genuine miracle. The file contained witness statements, typed out, single-spaced. He was everywhere, wrote Private Glenn B. Gist. We could see him up there, silhouette against the sky, just lowering man after man. Another report from Sergeant Tadashi Funakoshi, a captured Japanese NCO, mentioned a lone American medic. He did not carry a gun. He seemed protected. We shot at him many times, but the bullets would not find him. The official count was 75. 75 men he lowered from that ridge. Doss, in his own quiet way, said it was probably closer to 50. It made no difference. It was impossible. But it happened. The facts were there. This was the creed. The unwritten law of the corpsman. It wasn't just Doss. It was thousands like him. Pharmacist's mate, second-class George W. Doc Rowe on Peleliu. Pharmacist's mate, first-class John Bradley on Iwo Jima. Men who threw themselves on grenades, who used their own bodies to shield the wounded, who performed surgery with jackknives while whispering words of comfort. They treated their own. They treated the enemy. A declassified report from the Office of Naval Intelligence, folder designation Humanitas Belli, detailed dozens of instances. A corpsman on Saipan giving his last canteen of water to a wounded Japanese soldier. Another captured on Corregidor who continued to treat American, Filipino, and Japanese wounded alike in the prison camp until he died of dysentery. A wound was a wound. A man was a man. It did not matter what uniform he wore. In a dusty archive box at the Marine Corps Museum, there are sketches. Not official photographs, but pencil and charcoal drawings done by a combat artist, Sergeant Victor H. Mays. They are rough, immediate, visceral. One shows two corpsmen dragging a Marine from a burning Amtrak, the heat almost palpable on the page. Another depicts a medic, face grim with concentration, applying a tourniquet to a leg while machine gun tracers streak the sky above him. The most haunting one shows a scene from Hacksaw Ridge, a lone figure, unmistakably Doss, lowering a bandaged body down the cliff face. He is a small, determined shape against a vast, dark precipice. The drawing is titled simply The Dock. But the story had another layer, a darker one. The targeting of medics, the intensity of it, felt personal. Some of the captured Japanese snipers, interrogated at length in secure facilities on Guam, told a different story than the one in the manuals. It was a rumor, a whisper, an order that came down not from the Imperial Army command, but from somewhere else, somewhere more sinister. The order was specific. Certain medics, those with a reputation, were to be captured if possible, not just killed. Captured. For what purpose, no one knew. The interrogator's notes trail off into speculation. Maybe for information. Maybe for something else. The name of a certain biological warfare group kept surfacing in the transcripts, a name that made even the most hardened intelligence officers go cold. Unit 731. And suddenly the story of the brave American medic took a much darker turn. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about what happened when they fell into the wrong hands. May 21st, 1945. A cave near Shuri Castle, Okinawa. The Hippocratic Oath was not written for places like this. It was a document of peace, of clean rooms and ordered beds. It was not meant for a hole in the earth that smelled of sulfur, cordite, and rotting flesh. The oath spoke of healing. It did not specify what to do when the patient you were meant to heal had spent the last hour trying to put a bayonet through your throat. An oath was just paper. A bayonet was steel. Pharmacist mate third-class Leo Jankowski knew the difference. He was 21. From the south side of Chicago, where the only war was fought with fists and words. They had trained him at Great Lakes, taught him anatomy, pharmacology, how to apply a tourniquet under fire. They taught him the medic's singular creed. Save a life. Any life. But they had also warned him. The whispers followed the corpsman from one blood-soaked rock to the next. Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo. Now here. Okinawa. The stories were always the same. They said the Japanese booby-trapped their own wounded. They said they would play dead, a grenade clutched in their hand. They said a medic's Red Cross was not a symbol of mercy, but a target. They said a lot of things, and it was all true. The cave was a black mouth in the limestone cliff. The fight for it had lasted 20 minutes. Now silence. A silence that hummed with what had just happened. Corporal Evans went in first, his M1 carbine held tight against his shoulder. Jankowski followed, his medical bag slapping against his hip. The beam of Evans's flashlight cut a nervous, bouncing path through the darkness, illuminating discarded rifles, spent shells, and the still, crumpled shapes of Imperial Japanese soldiers. 3 of them. Maybe 4. It was hard to tell in the gloom. The air was thick enough to chew. It tasted of gunpowder and something else. Something sweet and terrible. Clear, Evans whispered, the sound deadened by the damp rock. Then his light settled on a shape in the corner. It moved. A groan, low and guttural. Evans raised his carbine. The light pinned a man, half buried under a pile of rubble, his tunic soaked a dark, glistening black. His eyes were open. They were black pits of hate. Let's finish this, Doc. Jankowski pushed past him. The words of his instructor from boot camp, a grizzled chief petty officer with a face like a road map of forgotten battles, echoed in his skull. There are no enemies here. There are no friends. There are only patients. You are not a soldier. You are a corpsman. You save the man, not the side. It was an insane logic, a beautiful, insane logic that had no place in this hell, but it was his. He's a patient, Jankowski said. His voice was flat, final. He's a Jap, Leo. He's a patient. The repetition was a shield, a prayer. Evans didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't fire. He just watched, his knuckles white on the stock of his carbine. He watched Jankowski do the unthinkable. Jankowski knelt in the filth. The Japanese soldier tensed, his lips pulling back from his teeth in a silent snarl. The smell of his wound was overwhelming. Jankowski opened his Unit 1 bag, the tools of his trade laid out on a dirty piece of canvas. Morphine syringe, sulfa powder, gauze pads, scissors, tape. A list of miracles in a world without them. He ignored the hate in the man's eyes. He saw only the wound. A deep gash in the thigh, probably from shrapnel. Arterial bleeding. He worked quickly, his hands sure and steady. He pressed a battle dressing against the wound, hard. The soldier cried out, a sharp, angry sound. Jankowski didn't flinch. He wrapped it tight. He saved his life. For now. The man just stared, his breathing ragged. The hate in his eyes was still there. But underneath it, something else flickered. Confusion, a question that had no words. A report found decades later in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, was filed by a Captain John H. Miller. The folder was thin, dusty, marked confidential in faded red ink. The document was titled Medical Corps Conduct, 10th Army, Okinawa. It spoke of a code, an unwritten rule among the medics and corpsmen. Rumors, they called them. Rumors of medics defying orders, defying common sense, going into spider holes and caves to treat the very men who had just ambushed their platoon. The report tried to explain it. Medical ethics, Christian charity, battle fatigue. It used a lot of words, but it missed the point. The point was simple. You treat the wound, not the uniform. You save the man, not the flag he fights for. It was a separate war, fought within the larger one. A war of conscience, fought one-on-one, in the dark, with a flashlight and a bag of bandages. No medals were given for it. The only witnesses were the dead and the men who would soon be dead. Sometimes the enemy who owed you his life. Back in the cave, the tension was a physical thing. It pressed in on them. The first soldier was stabilized, his breathing even. He was unconscious now, the morphine pulling him under. Jankowski crawled toward another shape, half hidden beneath a dead countryman. Something ain't right, Leo, Evans hissed. I can feel it. The pops of distant rifle fire seemed a million miles away. Inside the cave, the silence was a living thing, listening. Jankowski ignored him. He was in the zone, the place where only the work mattered. He could see the wound on the second soldier. Frothy pink bubbles at the man's chest. A sucking chest wound. He had to seal it. Fast. He grabbed the dead soldier lying on top of the wounded one and pulled. The body was heavy, stiff. He rolled it aside to get better access. Underneath it, half covered by a tattered blanket, lay a Type 97 hand grenade. The pin was gone. The only thing holding the firing spoon down was the dead man's weight. Jankowski had just moved the dead man. A click. It was soft. So soft you could mistake it for a pebble falling. But they didn't. Evans froze, his face a pale mask in the gloom. Jankowski froze, his hand still on the dead man's shoulder. On the ground, the first Japanese soldier, the one he had just treated, his eyes snapped open. They were wide with a terror that erased all hate. He knew what that sound was. He knew. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. That's the time the manual said you had. The time it takes for your life to flash before your eyes. A lie. There is no time for anything. The spoon of the grenade, freed from its pressure, popped up with a faint metallic sigh. A small puff of smoke. Then the hiss. In the sudden, suffocating darkness of the cave, there was only the sound of the fuse. March 19th, 1985, Iwo Jima. The silence was the loudest thing on the island. A profound, crushing silence where the roar of a world at war used to be. 40 years. The black sand was still black. The rock was still rock. But the men were different. They were old. Their uniforms were gone, replaced by slacks and windbreakers and ball caps, shielding wrinkled faces from the Pacific sun. Former U.S. Marines, former soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army. They stood on the same beach, a place they had come to die. Now they had come to remember. This was the first reunion of honor, an impossible gathering. Nobody thought it could happen. But it did. John Thompson was not there. He was in Des Moines, Iowa, selling nails and lumber. The television news showed a brief clip. Old men crying, handshakes, a Japanese man placing a bottle of sake on a makeshift altar, an American placing a small flag beside it. Thompson watched, his face impassive. He switched the channel. The man in the cave was dead. He had to be. Nobody could survive that. Nobody. The file in his mind was closed, stamped. Deceased. It had been closed for 40 years. Kenji Tanaka was not there. He was in a small house in Kagoshima, watching the same ocean from a different shore. His granddaughter asked him about the scars on his chest. He told her he fell from a tree as a boy. A big tree. He never spoke of the island. The island was a ghost, a shame, a nightmare he had somehow walked out of, leaving his soul behind in a dark, sulfur-stinking cave. The medic who gave him water was not real. A fever dream, a spirit. He called him the Kyoku no Tamashi, the soul of memory. The story was supposed to stay buried like the thousands of bodies still sealed in Iwo Jima's tunnels and caves. But stories, like ghosts, want to be heard. It began with a name, Kaito Abe, a young journalist from the Asahi Shimbun. He was assigned a story for the 50th anniversary of the war's end, a human interest piece. He wanted to find something different, not generals, not strategy, just a man, a single man who survived the inferno. He heard rumors, whispers from other veterans. There was a man, a Sergeant Tanaka, who the Americans had left for dead. But someone didn't. Someone went back. The folder Abe started was thin. File 731, the Iwo Jima Anomaly. He found Kenji Tanaka in the Kagoshima Prefectural Archives. Address, service record, pension details. Abe journeyed south. He found an old man tending bonsai trees. The man's hands were steady, his eyes were not. They held the fire and the darkness of that place. Tanaka refused to speak. For 3 days, Abe returned, sitting in silence on the old man's porch. On the 4th day, Tanaka spoke. He spoke of the dark, the thirst, the pain that was a universe, and then the light, a helmet, a face, an enemy's face. A canteen pushed to his lips, a bandage pressed against the bleeding hole in his side. He remembered the insignia, a number 4. That was all, the 4th Marine Division. Abe's article was published, The Enemy Who Gave Me Water. It was a small story in a big newspaper, but it traveled. It crossed the ocean. It was translated crudely for a veterans newsletter in California. A man named Bill Latimer, formerly a sergeant with the 4th, read it over his morning coffee in San Diego. He remembered. He remembered a corpsman from Iowa, a quiet kid everyone called Doc, the one who never left anyone behind. Not ours, not theirs, if he could help it. A name surfaced from the fog of 50 years. Thompson. John Thompson. The phone rang in a hardware store in Des Moines, Iowa. October 4th, 1994. A quiet Tuesday. Is this Mr. John Thompson, who served with the 4th Marine Division? The voice had an accent. Japanese. Yes. Did you serve on Iwo Jima in 1945? A long pause. The sound of hammers and saws faded away. Yes, I did. My name is Kaito Abe. I am calling on behalf of a Mr. Kenji Tanaka. He wants to know if you remember a cave on Hill 362A. The meeting was in Honolulu, neutral ground. A hotel lobby filled with plastic palm trees and the faint smell of chlorine from the pool. John Thompson, 71 years old, stood by the window. Kenji Tanaka, 73, walked towards him, leaning on a cane. He was smaller than Thompson remembered. Of course he was. They were giants then. They were boys. Now they were just old men. They stopped. A foot of space between them, the space between two worlds. Tanaka gave a short, stiff bow. Thompson stuck out a hand, a rough working man's hand. Tanaka took it. They didn't need the translator for long. They spoke of children, of grandchildren, of building houses, of growing trees. They did not speak of the battle, not at first. They walked by the ocean. Two old men, one who took a life to save his own, one who risked his life to save an enemy. The legacy was not written in history books or carved onto the grand memorials in Washington. It was here, in a handshake, in a shared silence between two men who should have been dust. There is a photograph. It was taken the next year at the reunion of honor on Iwo Jima. Thompson and Tanaka. They stand together on the black sand. Thompson's arm is around Tanaka's shoulder. They are smiling. Behind them, Mount Suribachi rises into a clear blue sky, a silent, sleeping volcano. This became the image, the symbol, the quiet counter-narrative to the raising of the flag. Peace, born from the very center of hell. Other stories emerged. A Marine sharing a cigarette with a captured soldier, a medic giving his own morphine. Small acts, human acts. Buried for decades under the weight of victory and defeat. The memory of war is complex. It is glory and horror. It is duty and death. It is hatred. And sometimes, against all orders, against all logic, it is compassion. That is the final, most stubborn mystery. In Kenji Tanaka's wallet, until the day he died in 2003, was a small, neatly folded square of yellowed gauze. American. Stained dark brown with 58-year-old blood. His blood. A receipt for a life he was never supposed to have. In the final, brutal arithmetic of war, what is the value of a single enemy life? The story flickers like a faulty projector bulb, casting ghosts on the walls of history. It exists in the fevered, sun-scorched memory of a Marine, his sight stolen by a mortar blast, who swore he saw a Navy corpsman kneeling in the volcanic ash. A hand, grotesquely steady amidst the chaos, holding a single morphine syringe over the shattered body of a Japanese machine gunner. The same machine gunner who had torn his platoon apart moments before. A choice made in the deafening span of a single screaming shell burst. A choice that evaporated like smoke, never coalescing into the ink of an official history. Not in the terse after-action reports cataloging ammunition spent and ground gained. Not in the exhausted debriefings of Army Air Force's crews, their B-29s crippled and bleeding fuel after 16-hour flights from the Marianas. Their minds numb to anything but survival. The accounts are whispers, fragments. A diary entry here, a redacted letter there. The truth remained somewhere else. It remained between the lines of commendations for bravery, between the sterile, numbered archival files stamped top secret, between the heavy silences of old men gathered for reunions, their uniforms long gone, replaced by slacks and simple windbreakers. Men who would speak for hours about the fighting, the fear, the victory, but not about this. Not about the moment the enemy ceased to be an enemy, the moment he became only a man. The field manuals were meticulously clear. They were Bibles of survival printed on waterproof paper. They taught a medic how to apply a battle dressing in under 30 seconds, how to sprinkle the miraculous sulfa powder into a wound, how to use his K-bar knife for an emergency tracheotomy. The mission was absolute, to conserve the fighting strength. It did not, however, specify what to do when the patient you were meant to heal had spent the last hour trying to put a bayonet through your throat. There was no protocol for the profound, dizzying vertigo of staring into the eyes of this other. This embodiment of hate and opposition, and seeing not a soldier, not an imperial fanatic, not a target, but a patient. A body broken and bleeding, just like any other. A human being drowning in his own blood. This was a different kind of war, fought in the 3 feet of space between one man and another. A war against instinct. A war against orders, a war for something that had no name in the lexicon of battle. It was a duty not to a flag, or a general, or a nation. It was a duty to a shared, fragile, and utterly inconvenient humanity. They came ashore as warriors. They were the pride of the Marine Corps, the heart of the Army, trained to conquer and destroy. They ran toward the sound of the guns. They left as something else entirely, something harder to define, harder to reconcile. In those searing moments, faced with the very men who had tried to kill them, they became healers. They performed an act that defies military logic, an act that transcends war itself, an act of radical, inexplicable grace, not forgiveness. It was too soon for forgiveness, not absolution. That was for a higher power. They offered something far more fundamental. They offered mercy. Some secrets are buried under stone crosses. Others are carried in the heart, a quiet, heavy burden for a lifetime. The real history of that war, and perhaps all wars, isn't just written in the grand narratives of blood and victory. It is written in these quiet, impossible moments, in the ledger of choices that defy explanation. These stories do not offer answers. They only deepen the questions. Was it a betrayal of their sworn duty, or the ultimate unwritten expression of it? We sift through the documents and the memories, searching for a definitive truth. But perhaps the truth is not a fact to be found. Perhaps it is a question to be lived with. The real question is not simply what they did, it is what it says about who we are and who we could be.